like to reintroduce Dr. Megan Barlow. As you can see behind me, this is our final parent topic for the evening, titled Friendships, Conflict Resolution, and Social Skills. Can't we all just get along? And I will say I have 3 daughters of my own, 17, 15, and 9, and we're still asking this question, but we think we might find some good answers tonight. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. All right, so pull this out because I'm a walker and talker, but so can't we all just get along? The answer is not always, and that is okay. So conflicts are very, very typical and healthy, and actually conflicts are important. So having conflicts within your family, so sibling conflict or conflicts with friends, that there is a reason why we have those kinds of problems, so that we can figure out how to communicate. How do we communicate our needs? How do we listen to other people's needs? And how do we navigate sort of the space in between, so that we make sure we're getting our needs met while we're also respecting and considering the other people in the situation. The other reason why we probably can't all just get along, I mean, I guess we could get along, we can respect each other, we can be considerate of each other, but friends are not always going to stay the same. You know, if you're friends with somebody one year, that might change a little bit the next year when we're talking about grade school. People kind of take front and center with a group of friends, and that fluctuates, and that's typical, and it's okay that that happens. We also know that when kids are in preschool and kindergarten, they oftentimes think of their entire class as their friends. You know, oh, so-and-so is my friend. Everybody in my class is a friend. And sometimes even preschool and kindergarten teachers refer to the class as friends. Okay, line up, friends. You know, all right, friends, it's time to go out for recess. We talk to each other in ways like that. But as kids develop, and typically developing kids, recognize that somewhere between kindergarten and 3rd grade, the people in your class are your classmates. They're not necessarily your friends. You know, many times in kindergarten, people, if they're having a birthday party, they might invite their whole class. By the time they're in 2nd, 3rd grade, they're really focusing on a couple preferred peers. And that's okay too. And among close friends, conflicts arise. And having a conflict doesn't mean necessarily that it's the end of a friendship or that somebody's not a good friend anymore. We can continue to be friends once we work through that conflict. So I want to talk a little bit about typical development, and I'm just going to kind of rush through these slides because I feel like oftentimes in a presentation I kind of rush through the end slides after giving you a lot of context. So I'm going to rush through this, and if you have questions about it or want me to slow down, please raise your hand and I'll clarify a little bit more. But when we're talking about preschool, some of the conflicts that come up are things like, really, preschoolers are just trying to learn how to share space with people. You know, how do you share materials? How do you take turns? How are you in the same room as other people who want the same kinds of things that you want? So how do you share? They need a lot of adult guidance and coaching to help them through this kind of stuff. So oftentimes it's the preschool teacher who models and kind of steps in and helps them figure out how to take turns, or how to, well, let's play it your way first and then we'll try it your way the next time. So they're really guiding and directing a lot of that. As kids grow and they're, you know, kindergarten, 1st grade, we see that adult guidance and coaching, we're really shaping that in ways. So adults can kind of take a couple steps back, and maybe they pop in certain situations to help kind of guide and tweak what they're doing, but kids are able to manage more and more of those conflicts on their own with their peers without adults being so present during that. When we talk about early school age, when I'm saying kindergarten through 2nd grade, that ISH, that's not like an acronym, that's ish, you know, 2nd grade-ish. So I'm talking about typical development, but we know that there's a wide range of what is typical, and some of this depends on, you know, the culture of the school, the actual kids involved. We know that the pandemic, we actually don't fully understand how the pandemic has impacted our kids' social development, but if you think about really how much growth happens in a year for kids. From a kindergartner is a very different kid than a first grader. And there's so much growth that happens year to year when we know that some of our kids have had really almost like a pause or an interruption in their opportunities to interact with their peers in the same kinds of ways. So, maybe they're not doing play dates and things like that, but even in the classroom, group projects and things were kind of on hold last year. So they weren't really having to sort out a lot of the conflicts that they have had in previous years. So we know that there's a little bit of a disruption there. So when we talk about ish, early school age, so that sort of kindergarten through second grade, some of the conflicts that we see in preschool, sharing, taking turns, things like that, but they are developing some skills. They have learned kind of ways to compromise. Picking, okay, how about we do it this way today, and then tomorrow we'll do it this way. So they're kind of picking up typically on what adults have led them to try in the past. But we see that kids are starting to become friends with other kids who maybe have similar interests, so they like to do the same kinds of things, or they're compatible. So compatible might mean that they have a similar play style. They're very imaginative and they like to run around on rocks, jumping off of rocks, pretending they're like cliff diving and doing all sorts of creative, imaginative kind of role-playing sorts of things. Maybe they're attracted to a friend who likes to play in that same kind of way. Or sometimes we see kids who are attracted to playmates who maybe are complementary, so not necessarily similar, but maybe like one kid is very much a leader and very creative and they've got a lot of ideas, and maybe they're drawn to other kids who are gonna like do what they want to do, so maybe more followers. Or maybe a follower kind of kid is really drawn towards more of like a leader. And sometimes I think if you've got kids who are maybe like, a year or two apart, and maybe, I don't want to say opposites, but sort of different kind of styles. One's more of a leader and one's more of a follower, or, one's a little bit riskier and one's a little bit more cautious. If they play together a lot and they're pretty good friends, sometimes I think you see that kind of, they're drawn to friends outside of the home who remind them of their sibling in a way, because they're comfortable in that role. They're like, okay, I get it. I know how to say okay when this person comes to me with some ideas for what we're going to play. So then as we're getting into the upper elementary, so the 3rd through 5th-ish, these kids are more secure in their closer friendships. And by the way, as we're moving up, in grades, how kids become friends with each other it changes a little bit. So in preschool, they really pretty much rely on the adults around them for their friendships. So that's like logistics. I'm in the same class as somebody. Somebody lives next door to me. My mom is friends with their mom and they get together. Really the parents are socializing with each other, but they're using their kids as an excuse. Like they want to hang out with each other and drink wine or gossip or whatever, and their kids are playing, which by the way probably helps with conflict resolution, because if you're involved in a really good gossip sesh with your friend, you don't really want to be bothered by sorting out the conflicts of your kid, right? So it's like, just go work it out. Where the adults are talking, go sort it out, and that actually can be good, right? As your kids get a little bit older and they make their own friends, maybe they're in class with somebody, there's that sort of point in time where, like, when your kid's invited on a play date, you kind of assume that you're going to be a part of it, and then it crosses over into, do you think this is can this be a drop-off situation, or do you think I'm going to have to go in and make small talk with this stranger, like, I don't really got stuff to do, so it kind of changes, right? And when you're at that spot where it changes, your kid is picking friends because they want to be friends with that person, not just because you've sorted it out for them, you've kind of engineered that for them, but they're actually attracted to that person. And you see that happen more and more as they get older. When we're talking about upper elementary, so that 3rd to 5th grade, some of this, we see that peers tend to gather more in like same-sex peer groups. So that's where we see maybe in kindergarten or 1st grade, there are some maybe boy-girl pairs of best friends, and maybe that is because they're close family friends, or they live near each other, or they were in the same preschool, or they're very compatible. But as kids get into the 3rd through 5th grade, that's where it's more like, okay, now the boys are over here doing, on the blacktop, playing kickball at recess, and the girls are over here at recess having some sort of club or whatever, art club or something that they're doing, which I realize is very much gender stereotypical, but if you ever spend any time on a recess, like playground, you will see that this is the way things work out. That means that if we're talking about, and I'll talk about this a little bit as we move on, but you know, boys who are in 4th or 5th grade who really aren't that much into sports, they sometimes have a tough time connecting with peers, because at that age, it's almost like, I don't want to say like overcompensating or whatever, but it's almost like the same-sex peer groups become so important, that's kind of like all there is. But then as they get a little bit older, it swings back into, you know what, you can do you a little bit more, and like, do the things that you're actually more comfortable doing, so boys and girls kind of become friends again and things like that. But it's almost like there's a period of time where they kind of like just try to fit in that group. And in the tweens and early teens, so if we're talking about maybe, you know, 6th through 8th grade, that's where we find peer groups are very important. You know, kids they're very focused on what their friends are doing, and they very desperately want to fit in and like absolutely not stand out, which is why you see kids walking around in clumps wearing like the same sneakers and basically the same outfit, but just maybe possibly, not always, but possibly a different colored shirt or something, you know, but like, God forbid a middle school boy is going to walk around in this weather in pants, you know, but if everybody that they go to school with is wearing shorts, they are absolutely going to wear shorts. Even if they're cold, they're going to wear shorts because they don't want to be different. You know, girls might text each other, wait, are you wearing jeans tomorrow? Who's wearing jeans tomorrow? Are you going to wear, okay, leggings and a t-shirt and Air Force Ones or whatever those things are. Okay, got it, that's what I'll be wearing, yep. You know, so it's like a uniform, you know. So they want very much to be accepted, and they don't want to stand out. And they want to just kind of move along in a group, in a crowd like that. And kind of as a part of that, we see a lot of the in-group and out-group stuff kind of arise. So this is where, you know, if you hear about like Mean Girls, or the, you know, the movie Mean Girls, or there's that kind of concept of like, we are the group and you can't sit with us, we're going to kind of leave you out, that sort of like relational aggression, we call it, that happens in a lot of groups of girls, where it's like, we are in, and part of what helps us feel like we are in is making sure we define the boundaries by saying, okay, it's us, and we know it's us in part because there's you over there and you're not a part of us. So that kind of like leaving somebody out makes people feel more secure in their place in the group. We see it with boys too, so it's not just a girl thing, but that in-group and out-group can become very difficult for middle schoolers to navigate. Okay, in order to be socially successful, there are a few qualities that we know is very, very important. Okay, so things like an ability to read the room and adapt your behavior. This is what we refer to sometimes as situational awareness. And this takes a lot of executive functioning. So executive functioning, things like being able to pay attention, things like being able to manage your impulses, wait, you know, that's part of managing your impulses, but being able to kind of like observe and check out what's happening. You know, so if you're walking up to, if you're like here at an event like this tonight where you're walking into a room and there are some people who might be talking to each other, if you are somebody who is typically developing in terms of your sort of social cognitive skills, you're probably automatically picking up on a few things. You're picking up on body language and tone and things like that in order to make some determinations, like, could I walk up to them? Are they in the middle of a private conversation? Is that more of like an open conversation? You know, we can pick up on cues to figure out, is it okay for me to join this group or not? If you have difficulty reading the room and you want to join a group of friends and you're a kid and we're talking about like recess or something, and there's a group of kids playing kickball and you just really want to play and you run up and you join in without observing a little bit or finding out like, wait, what are the rules, what are the teams, oh, can I play? Like there are some steps you kind of have to go through in order to join. And it doesn't really take that much time, and it isn't, of course, formalized, but if you just jump right in and say like, I'm on this team and it's my turn, people are gonna that's kind of off-putting to other people, right? When you just jump right in. On the other hand, if you are maybe really shy and kind of anxious about, are people going to accept me in that group, you might have trouble reading the room because you're reading perfectly neutral, ambivalent kind of signals as maybe like they don't want me as a part of that group. Where maybe somebody's just looking at their phone because they're bored or something. But like if you walked up to them and said, oh, hey, how are you? They might stop what they're doing on their phone and have a nice conversation with you and want to have that conversation with you. So it takes a lot of savvy to read the room, but for many people, they can do it pretty automatically. And it's not something that comes naturally to other people, especially if they have difficulty with their executive functioning, or if they have a social cognitive learning disorder, which would be like autism, for example, where they're not able to pick up on those social cues necessarily. Flexibility, that's also, by the way, part of executive functioning, being able to be flexible in your thinking. So being flexible, if you're trying to get together with a friend and you want to make plans, but you're like set on exactly what you're going to do and where you're going to go and what time it's going to be and what you're going to talk about, why is your friend even a part of that, right? Like that sometimes people get so stuck on what they want to do, and I'm talking about kids. Sometimes, it's like, I'm gonna have so-and-so come over and we're gonna jump on the trampoline and then we're gonna play Legos and then we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that. Well, when their friend comes over, it's like, how about you find out if they wanna jump on the trampoline? I personally do not enjoy jumping on a trampoline unless I have an extra pair of pants nearby these days, So like, maybe kids have the same problem. So, checking out, like, what do you feel like doing? What do you want to do? It's a good idea to have kind of a rough sketch of what you might do when your friend comes over, but to have it set in stone in your head and then have any kind of trouble adjusting that based on what your friend wants to do, that's a tough playmate. That's tough to play with that kid. And an openness and an approachability. So this is like, sometimes we see kids who are maybe anxious. They kind of give off a vibe of like, I don't really want to talk to you. They actually do want to talk. They actually do want to engage and interact and be a part of it. But they're feeling uncomfortable, so as a part of that feeling uncomfortable, they might, turn away or put their head down. Or sometimes we talk about, like, one of my friends who's a preschool teacher talks about grumpy eyebrows and friendly eyebrows. Like, are you giving facial expressions that show that you are friendly and you want to interact, or do you have a look on your face that's like shut down, right? Openness also refers to an openness to new experiences, so trying some different things, and that can relate to flexibility as well. When I say attractiveness and athleticism, I really was like, not sure if I should even get into this or put this on the slide, but the truth is, what we know from social psychology, that looks do matter, and the kinds of things you're interested in does matter. And if you are good at sports and you are a kid, it does matter in terms of how well received you will be by your peers. And we know in terms of adults walking around in the world that the way you look matters. People talk about, an attractive person, all of a sudden they're like, they rate things like their honesty or their work ethic and things like that higher without any information besides what that person looks like. And we see that in kids too.
Some of that aligns too to like just a natural confidence. So it's not necessarily that they're attractive in certain senses, but maybe they're just a confident person and it's the way that they walk and present themselves. So instantly people are drawn to that individual. Same thing with someone that's athletic, they're confident in their skill set, so you're like, oh wow, they're really cool, I want to be like that.
I think you're right. Some of that has to do with confidence and kind of tagging on to that experience and what's reinforced. So there are some people who are well liked from the time that they're very young because maybe they have a cute smile or they're precocious or something like that. And so when they talk to people, it's like everyone responds in a very friendly way to them. And that's their experience of people from a pretty young age. So then it continues, so probably that helps them feel confident and comfortable, and then it builds and it builds and it builds. And that also kind of goes to that openness and approachability, right? It's when people feel a little bit more confident, they come across as a bit more open and approachable. The reason why I put it on here is not because it's like, oh, well, you know, if your kid isn't athletic, then too bad, like they're out of luck. It's because kids come home and they say things to their parents like, well, I'm not good at soccer, so, you know, I don't have anybody to play with at recess. Okay, well, what's everybody else doing at recess? Well, they're playing soccer. Well, why don't you play soccer? Because I'm not good at soccer, I don't know how to play it. Oh, come on, just go and play, you know, it'll be okay. Well, you might be setting your kid up for a tough situation, because if you're in 4th grade and you don't know the rules of some game that these kids have been playing for a long time and you're coaching your kid, just go and play. They might be setting themselves up to be made fun of or rejected or whatever. Maybe, and I learned this from, there's a treatment program called the Summer Treatment Program. And it's a program for kids, the Cleveland Clinic has a site, but it's a national program. And I was a counselor there the summer before I went to graduate school. And there was a kid who, it's a treatment program for kids with ADHD and other kinds of disorders that might go along with ADHD. So there was a kid whose ADHD symptoms were pretty well managed, and so we thought like, oh, let's give him some additional goals to work on, and I was in charge of giving him some additional goals to work on. Although I was pretty inexperienced at that point, and he was kind of a shy kid, so I thought, well, his goal can be to like start a conversation every day at lunch. So I told him that was his goal, and he's very much like a goal-oriented, you know, high-achieving kind of kid. So he was like 6 at the time. So he's like, okay, I'll start that conversation every day at lunch. Well, there were 2 boys who were playing football, like they ate lunch and then they had a little time to play. So there's 2 boys playing football, one kid's over here, one kid's over here, and they're throwing a football back and forth, playing catch. And this kid whose goal was to start a conversation is like, hey guys, I have this thing, and it's called OCD, and it makes me walk up and down the stairs until I get it right. You know, and he is like thinking that's starting a conversation, and I realized, well, I really set him up for failure, you know, like I told him to do something, start a conversation, but I really didn't help him figure out like, how do you do that? How do you figure out who's a good person to start a conversation with? Well, 2 people playing catch, they don't really want to have a conversation about your OCD, you know, and what are the topics of conversation? So when I say this about like athleticism and attractiveness and stuff like that, it's because that is actually in part reality. And when kids are coming home saying, well, I don't have any friends because of this or that, it's not a lost cause, but it's also not something that I think you as parents or that I as a psychologist want to say, oh, no. I mean, I want to reassure these kids. Like, I like you. I want to be friends with you. So I want to give that reassurance to them. Oh, sure, everybody's going to like you. But we actually have to remember what it's like to be a kid at that age and kind of what is a part of that culture, what is a part of that group, what is accepted. So some of it also is the things that they're interested in. You know, are they interested in things that other kids their age tend to be interested in, or do they have unique interests? Well, I never want to make a kid fit in just to fit in. I love when kids have unique interests, but I do need to understand that that means it might make it harder to develop some of these friendships in school. And so we have to work on what do we do then? Okay, part of being typical is that kids will be mean at times. So even your own sweet, nice, caring, kind kid is gonna probably be mean to somebody at some point in time. And hopefully they will recognize, oh, that was mean. And hopefully they will feel bad. Not shamed, you know, not punished, but hopefully they will, you can help them if they realize like, I feel really bad because I lied when so-and-so asked me if I could play today because I just didn't really want to play with them, and I lied, and instead I, you know, was going to go over to so-and-so's house, and then they found out, or whatever, you know. One of the things you can do as a parent is not say anything like, well, you know, lying isn't nice, or you don't want to jump right into correcting. It's helpful to say, well, so how do you think that made them feel? You know, and then also, so how do you feel? So that kind of building empathy, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, but knowing that this is a part of what being a kid is figuring out, how do I get along with other people? So part of it means making mistakes and adjusting, and you learn, okay, so I gotta come up with a way to get out of these kinds of situations differently than what I just did, because I didn't like the way that that made my friend feel or me feel, you know, so we gotta figure out what else we can do. Other kids will be mean to them sometimes. And I say mean in quotes because it's not always a direct meanness or nastiness. Sometimes, I guess, I think about mean when I'm talking about it with kids is sometimes people do things that make you feel bad, you know, so it's not necessarily calling you a name, but it might be that they don't invite you to something, you know, and maybe that's not somebody intentionally being mean. Maybe they were only allowed to invite, you know, 2 kids to something, and you were like their third choice, you know. It's not necessarily mean, but it makes you feel bad, right? And that's gonna happen. You're probably gonna be, your feelings are going to be hurt, and you're also probably going to hurt somebody else's feelings at some point in time. Kids are trying out different roles. So, you know, they're trying to figure out who they are in this group of peers. And sometimes I don't like watching my kids sometimes around certain friends, you know, because I feel like around certain friends, maybe they're like showing off a little bit, or they're doing something that I don't normally see them doing, like at home or in other friendships. And sometimes it's a little bit of like trying out these different roles, you know, kind of, it's almost like playing. It's almost like, you know, imagination, and what is it like if I'm sort of this character, and kind of figuring out what feels right. Sometimes they're gonna follow, sometimes they're gonna take the lead. They might pick up annoying habits from kids, so like, sometimes, I mean, it's like, my son is in 3rd grade, and, okay, your mom is like, that is a response that he and all of his friends say to anything, you know? Oh, so you're playing lacrosse? Do you like it? Your mom likes it. I'm like, yeah, I guess, I don't know, you know? It's like, okay, so that's one of those sort of annoying habits that my son has picked up along with all of his friends. They think it's so funny, they think it's so cool. I get really annoyed with it, but it's also sort of like, I know that he's trying to find his place. And it's sort of that in-group, out-group, right? It's we all think it's funny. There's a line that's gonna cross, like that, okay, fine, I'll deal with that, I'll roll my eyes about it, I'll accept that. But there's a line that, you know, then I wouldn't accept, maybe beyond that. And I would say to my son, like, listen, you can't talk like that, or that's not something that you can do, or, but I don't exactly know where that line is. It probably depends on my energy for the day of what I feel like enforcing. But just knowing that they have to figure it out. Okay, so when your kid talks to you, so if your kid comes home and they have a problem, they want to tell you that somebody's been being mean to them, or there was some situation that happened. The first thing that I think you need to do and need to remember is to stay neutral. So when I say stay neutral, it's because I think that a lot of times when our kids come home telling us about some sort of situation at school, our brains almost automatically want to figure out, like, do I need to protect my kid, or do I need to correct my kid? Has my kid done something wrong that I need to correct them and tell them how they could do it differently? Or has somebody done something to my kid and I need to protect them from that? But avoid going down that path of trying to figure out, does my kid need a correction or a protection? And stay neutral while you get a little bit more context and information. Avoid jumping to those conclusions. Help them lay it out for you by asking questions like, oh, and then what happened? I think about it like when I'm talking with kids and I'm working with kids or teenagers, I'm always literally like trying to picture what it is that they're telling me about. So I want to be able to imagine, so where were you? Like, what's the setting? If I was having to write a screenplay about this conversation, I want to be able to figure out the characters, the setting, the script, the tone, like all of that stuff. So I will ask questions to try to just understand what was happening, not to figure out, okay, were you in the right or were you in the wrong, or do you need protection or do you need correction, but more like to just almost so that I can pretend I was there, like observing what was happening. Don't assume that whatever they're telling you about was bullying. And I think we use the word bullying a lot, and our kids use the word bullying a lot. And as they get older, that turns into toxic. Oh, she's so toxic. That's like a very popular phrase now for teenagers to use. But younger kids will talk about bullying. And I'm not an advocate for bullying. I don't think that bullying is a good thing. But I do think we need to be careful about calling something bullying when it's really rudeness or, inconsideration or meanness. Somebody's being a jerk, but not necessarily bullying you. Or maybe you're reading into it and it's not actually even directed at you. But so we don't want to jump to the conclusion that something is bullying. True bullying is something that is repeated and intentional, and there's a power or status difference. So if we're talking about two classmates and one classmate doesn't have any sort of quote-unquote power over the other, as soon as you label it bullying, you're actually kind of giving your kid a message that other kid is like in some way superior to you and has the ability to put you in that victim role. I don't know if that's making sense, but I do think that calling something bullying and saying, you've been bullied or he's bullying you, in some ways it kind of takes away a kid's like power and ability to do something about it, or even just sort of move on from it. And it also can end a relationship. So I think there are a lot of times where kids will come home and they'll want to talk through something that happened, and maybe their friend was really not being very nice, being kind of a jerk or being inconsiderate or whatever, and the parent's like, well, she's not your friend anymore. Why are you friends with her? She's mean, But sometimes, going back into what's normal, our kids are not always going to be like stand-up citizens. They are gonna maybe run away from their friend at recess because they want to play with a different friend that day, and they don't want to say to their friend, no, I don't want to play with you today. But they're a nice kid, and they're still friendship to be salvaged, that kid just doesn't know how to say, I want to do something else today. You know, they don't have like assertiveness skills or something like that. But if you label it as bullying and saying she's not your friend, don't be friends with her or something, then all of a sudden it's almost like you're putting a stop to that friendship for a kid instead of helping them figure out how they might be able to repair it. It could be bullying, and if it is, you'll advocate for your kid. Okay, so one of the things that I think can be helpful is to try to determine, you know, is it bullying, is it friendly teasing, is it rudeness, or is it just not about you? So we talk about friendly teasing, and by the way, I do not say to kids like, oh, a lot of times you hear this, girls and boys, you know, like, oh, he's just teasing you because he likes you, or whatever. I don't think that that's a very healthy message or a very useful message, but I do think that sometimes it's important to explain that people might be saying something because they think it's funny and they're going to think you're going to think it's funny. They're trying to have a good time. The intention is like, let's all have a laugh together. Let's joke around. If they find out that it's not funny, like you don't think it's funny, you're not having a good time, and it's friendly teasing, they will stop or they will change. It could be that, you know, maybe in their house they do a lot of joking around or whatever, and they're just not skilled enough to figure out where the line is, where funny stops and mean begins or rude begins, right? And kids have to learn that. They have to learn where the line is. If somebody is really trying to be friendly and joke around in a like jovial way, when they find out this isn't funny, it hurts my feelings, they'll stop or they'll change. Rudeness is maybe using you to get a laugh. So that is mean. Maybe somebody's being direct or honest without considering their tone or how you're gonna feel. So, trying to think of a good example, but like, so I'm thinking about a kid who, let's say, you know, people are picking teams to play football, and somebody says like, well, how come I'm always the last to be picked? And another kid says, well, because you're the worst one. The person saying you're the worst one is maybe not bullying, but they're not using very good social skills, right? Like that's probably not something that you would say, even if all of us are thinking it and all of us feel like it's true. Most of us know that that's just not something you say out loud to another person because it's going to hurt their feelings, right? But some people don't have those social skills, so they might end up saying or doing things that are rude and that make you feel bad, but it's not really bullying because they don't really know how to do it differently, and maybe they deserve that opportunity to learn how to do it differently. Sometimes it's just not about you. So, you know, sometimes somebody's having a bad day, and so they're dismissive of you, or they don't smile, or they don't laugh at something, but it's maybe because they're in their own head about something, or they're doing their own thing. You know, so younger kids will sometimes get their feelings very, very hurt if a friend doesn't want to like play with them or do the same thing. But maybe it's because, you know, today I feel like swinging on the swings. I don't feel like playing tag with you. And kids are trying to figure out, how do I get my needs met? How do I do what I want and do the things that I need while also being considerate of what you want and what you need? And it's hard to calibrate because there are some kids who do a lot of what they themselves want, and they don't necessarily know how to like sometimes do the things that other people want. There are a lot of kids and adults who do a lot of what other people want without sometimes saying what they want, you know, and that's difficult too. So figuring out how do you manage both your own needs and somebody else's is hard work, and it's something that a lot of adults are still trying to figure out how to do. When a kid errs too much on one side or the other, sometimes that comes across as like meanness or hurting your feelings, but it's not bullying. And other times, sometimes a person is just doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I will say that I do work with a lot of kids who have autism, and I have heard a similar sort of thing from many kids, like they're all bullying me. My whole team is bullying me, or like the recess monitor is bullying me, or my teacher's bullying me, or something like. What do you mean your teacher's bullying you? She said we weren't going to have any homework, and then I didn't finish this math thing, and then she told me I had to finish it tonight. Okay, so that's not really bullying, the teacher's doing their job, right? And yes, I get it. I understand why that doesn't make you feel good. That's not bullying. Or, like, the whole kickball team was bullying me. Okay, what happened? Well, when I got out, they cheered. Oh, wait, your team cheered when you got out? No, the other team. Well, yeah, because the other team's trying to, win, and that means you got to get out, right? So they don't always understand and take it personally. And so that's not bullying. Of course, that's me helping this kid understand sometimes people are doing their job. They're just doing their own thing. They're doing what they're supposed to do, and it doesn't make you feel good. A phrase that is really, really helpful to use with kids of any age is, that happens sometimes. So when a kid is coming to you and talking to you about a concern that they have with a friend, sometimes you can even use it to buy yourself time. Just like, yeah, that happens sometimes. And now you're going to try to get a little more information, right? You're going to try to make sure you've got that scene in your head of what was happening. We want to help our kids understand that friendships have conflicts, and kids can be impolite, and kids can be mean. When you say that happens sometimes, you're leaving the sort of window open. You're leaving a lot of wiggle room for once you get more information. If this kid's like, I still want to be friends with the person who hurt my feelings or whatever, when you say something like that happens sometimes, you're kind of allowing that possibility that this friendship isn't necessarily over. Sometimes we just have to talk about it. Maybe you gotta explain, I don't like it when you do that. Or if you're saying that happens sometimes, it can kind of help a kid save face or feel normal. That, yeah, sometimes you don't get invited to a birthday party. That happens sometimes. You feel like everybody else got invited but you. It doesn't feel good, and it happens sometimes. So you're also not assigning any sort of judgment. It's pretty matter of fact and neutral. Okay, so now what? So now if you're talking with your kid and you kind of have a sense of the stage, where it happened, the characters, the tone, the script, things like that. Now you can move towards the resolution step. But the first thing you want to do is, before you move to resolution, is validate. So you want to make sure that you're saying something along the lines of, to your kid of well, I can see why that would hurt your feelings, or I could see why that would embarrass you, or make you feel bad, or whatever. Or, that sounds like it was frustrating, or that sounds like that was kind of lonely. So you're giving a sense of, I get it. This is how I would feel, or your feelings are perfectly valid and understandable given what you just explained to me. I think we want to remember that long-term goals, I think, are that our kids keep coming to us when they have these kinds of problems, right? Whether it's with friends or other important relationships or jobs or whatever. We want our kids to know that coming to us is helpful and makes them feel good and hopefully moves them towards some kind of effective resolution. We don't want to punish them coming to us by criticizing them, or telling them, well, here are all the ways that you did that wrong, and now you're in trouble, because then our kids start to hide things from us. They don't want to tell us about stuff because they don't want to hear our critique of how they did this, whatever they did, and what they should have done instead. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind. And we also want to keep in mind that we want our kids to want to talk this stuff through with us, but not have to talk it through with us in order to figure out what to do. So we want our kids to be able to figure out how to manage some of these conflicts on their own and these situations on their own, not necessarily be looking to us for instructions about what to do and how to do it. So that starts by, from a very young age, asking, once you've already kind of got an idea of what happened and you've already got an idea of like, I think this kid was just being inconsiderate or rude or whatever, this kid wasn't being very nice or whatever. You kind of have an idea of like a hypothesis of what you think was going on, and you might already have an idea of what you think should be done next. But before you give your suggestion about what should be done next, ask, so do you have any ideas about what you want to do? Do you think you might have an idea about, how to handle this, or what do you think you want to do? So you're inviting your kid to tell you what they want to do. Then you can move towards helping them generate ideas. Maybe they have an idea, and if they have an idea and you think it's not the way to go, I would not say, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to do this instead. You want to help them kind of think that through. So you want to help them imagine what would happen if they did that. And kind of help them sort of evaluate their own idea. And you can also generate other ideas and then help them evaluate those ideas. What is going to help you and your kid figure out what to do is first clarifying, like, well, what do I want to happen? What's my desired outcome? So if it's like, I just want them to leave me alone, or I just want to be friends. Like, I don't want to be I don't want to be invited to everything, but I just don't want any conflict. I don't want any drama. Or, I want them to stop doing something, or I want them to start doing something. Figure out what it is that they want to have happen. And then you can help them sort out the kinds of things that they can do to get there. Oh, whoops, this was supposed to be like an arrow image. Sorry that the graphics got weird. But compliment sandwich is a technique that I teach kids and that I use very often. And I'm sorry if I've ever compliment sandwiched you. But compliment sandwich, the steps of that is to say something positive, then state the problem, then suggest a solution or make a request, and then say something positive again. So, for example, a kid might say, because one of the really, really common like kindergarten, first grade problems and friends is, if you do this or don't do this, I won't be your best friend anymore. And kids actually really believe that, that she said she's not gonna be my best friend anymore, although that person says that every other day and you continue to be best friends, they still, it's like you're held hostage by this idea that someone's gonna dump you as a friend. And sometimes, there's this insecurity about being friends with more than one person at a time, right? So I have a lot of fun playing with you. I don't like when you tell me you won't be my friend if I play with Sally. 2, we can all play together, or maybe some days I'll play with Sally and some days with you. I want to keep being friends with you. That's if a kid says, I want to keep being friends, but I also want to play with other people, right? So help them figure out, how do you talk about that? How do you say what you want while being respectful and considerate of another person? A compliment sandwich is being assertive, right? But it feels like polite assertiveness. Being assertive does not mean being aggressive, but I think there are sort of people have, I think, different, I don't know if I would say comfort levels, maybe that seems right, with how assertive can I be? So a compliment sandwich seems very, very friendly, I think. Saying to somebody, stop, might feel kind of in the middle, like that, oh gosh, is that kind of harsh? Well, it's not really harsh, you're not being aggressive, but you're being pretty firm about things. And some people have an easier time being a little bit more friendly versus a little firm. A kid has to actually, or a person, whoever's going to use any of these strategies, has to actually feel comfortable doing it. So sometimes a parent will have a much more like assertive style than a kid and will say, you know, well, she's getting walked all over, like they're walking all over her and she needs to do this and she needs to do that. It's like, well, it's not gonna work if she's not comfortable doing it that way. So you have to kind of think about who your kid is and how they're comfortable communicating. But there are different ways that you can be assertive by just saying stop. Maybe you don't mean it, but when you joke about that, it really bothers me. Can you just stop with these jokes? You can help a kid prepare a comeback. Now, I have these qualifiers here because giving like a comeback, coming back with a comeback, I don't know how you say that, but that actually takes a lot of social skills. So I only coach up kids who have pretty good social skills to do this, because otherwise they're going to get in trouble. A comeback should not be an insult. A comeback should not be something that's going to get you in trouble if you say it. But a comeback is a way to kind of like stand your ground and be assertive while trying to reach your desired outcome. But it's kind of like you're playing it cool. You know, you're kind of like, oh, you can dish it out, I can take it, and I'm going to dish it out too. But it's not something that's going to lead to like a fist fight, you know? And you're not trying to top the original comeback. A lot of times it's like you're just trying to shut it down, actually. So things like, and you got to take sort of their age and their development into consideration, because if you try to tell a kid to say something like, well, it takes one to know one, you know, like they're going to be, again, you're setting them up for being just really made fun of. So and I always have to ask, I'm better at this with girls than with guys because I don't really know how guys talk to each other. And so I say things like, dude, you're like obsessed with me. But then I realize, well, that sounds very like feminine. So I don't know that guys say things like so much, or dude. I don't know that they really say that. So please don't give this line to your kid and have that set them up, but something along those lines. And I always ask, like, would people your age talk like that at your school? Like, is that normal, or am I really old? But so you want to find out, you know, how can you shut it down? Something a little bit safer than a verbal comeback is kind of like a comeback attitude, okay? So you might not say something like, takes one to know one, or, dude, you're like obsessed with me, but you might have a comeback attitude where you kind of, it's like the vibe is, you know, I can't even be bothered with you, right? So it's sort of like, you know, you might just kind of eye roll or like, whatever, you know, like just kind of shrug it off, right? And for younger kids, I will actually teach them the shrug, you know, and I'm like, okay, you can do like one shoulder shrug, you can do both shoulders, do it with an eye roll, you know, like we really practice like different kinds of shrugs, but the shrug says like, I can't even take the time to like be bothered with this, you know, and sometimes we'll have a theme song. So there was a song a while ago that's like, I'm gonna do it again, I'm gonna sing, and it's recorded and whatever, but there was a song a while ago that's like, la, 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 whatever, la, 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 it doesn't matter, la, la. So sometimes we play that song and we like shrug while we're doing it, you know, but if a kid can kind of get that, because adults tell kids to ignore it, and kids who are angry and upset, having their feelings hurt, especially kids who don't have very good social skills, cannot ignore being teased or being made fun of. They can't ignore it because their faces probably show that they are getting incredibly upset and furious, and sometimes it's that physical reaction that is reinforcing to whoever is teasing them. You know, they want to get a reaction out of them, right? So if we think that teasing is being reinforced and continued because a kid is like showing, you know, they're losing it. And sometimes kids, that can be bullying, I think, when people are provoking a kid who has trouble with their self-control and their emotion regulation, and so now they're like really losing it and they're having to get sent out into the hallway and stuff like that. Sometimes people will push. We really try to teach a kid not to ignore and think that they're going to actually be able to ignore, but we teach them to like roll their eyes or be like, I can't even deal. Like I don't have the time for that, you know? And so it's almost like you're brushing it off. Okay, other strategies that are options to evaluate are things like shifting your focus, or you're shifting your attention, or changing your perspective. So sometimes we'll see that kids will get very hung up on wanting to like be a part of a specific group. And from what your kid is telling you, you have been able to suss out that that particular group isn't all that interested in being friends with your kid. And so they're not necessarily doing things that are horribly mean, but you can tell they're like trying to get some space from your kid. They're, you know, not inviting them. They're not doing anything that's really going to obviously get them in trouble, but they really aren't interested in hanging out. But your kid is like so focused on getting in with that group, so then they continue to feel left out or upset or bullied or whatever every time those people are like not talking to them, or they're not playing with them, or not inviting them. So that's where we sometimes talk about an option of like, well, let's shift your attention to other kids who you do feel good around, like other kids who do seem to want you to talk to you, or who is laughing when you're telling those jokes or whatever. So kind of shifting, looking around. If your focus is on those people who are leaving you out, how do you move your focus into other people in the room, and other opportunities or other activities, things like that. Okay, so, and I say things like making lemonade. So there are certain situations where, you know, we talk about making lemonade out of lemons, you know, and there are some kids who really don't connect on a lot of the same kinds of things that their peers are interested in. And sometimes that's, you know, maybe a kid is gifted or very, very sensitive, or they're just not a typical kid, but absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like, actually, they're probably a pretty amazing, awesome kid, and everything that makes them not fit in is what makes them really, like, a nice person to be around. I think it's perfectly fine to acknowledge that, yeah, like, one girl I worked with when she was like in kindergarten, I didn't know her when she was in kindergarten, but her mom told me this story about when she was in kindergarten. The mom had to go, she's a very gifted kid, and just, you know, really was very adult-like as a child. And the mom went to her kindergarten class for like parent night, and you know, there were posters all around, like A is for apple and B is for ball and stuff like that. And the mom came home from parent night, and the kid said, "So now do you see what I'm dealing with?" And the mom was like, "Yeah, okay, I get it. Like, you're in a place where you are like an adult plopped into a kindergarten class when you're being talked to like you're a 5-year-old, because you're a 5-year-old, but you really are in a lot of ways more like a 40-year-old, you know?" And like, I mean, you're never going to convince that kid, like, to just try to fit in like that. And why? Why would you to convince that kid, you know? But it's sort of like, sometimes we talk about making lemonade. So I will tell you to like make a movie, or, you know, go home and entertain your family. I'm not sure I agree. I kind of think this is a situation where you might need an adult to step in. But let's wait and see. You know, so you're just going to kind of give them a little bit of space and time, because again, they came to you to talk about it. And so we don't want to shut that down. If you're really certain that you need to step in, be sensitive to their concerns, and remember that you do want them to trust you and continue to trust you. So talk through a plan to minimize. Be honest. Don't try to sneak. Don't do the like, okay, well, she told me not to call you, but I'm still calling you anyways because blah, 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 blah. Just be honest and say, you know, I get it. I know that you're worried about this being worse. If I say something, I really think, though, that I need to say something. Let's talk through a plan for how I'm going to do that. Like, maybe here's what I can say. I'll say these parts, but not these parts. Or, you know, so you're going to kind of walk it through, so you tell them, this is how I'm going to do it. Or you're trying to kind of minimize their discomfort with it. And letting them know that sometimes adults do have to step in. Like, that's okay. When you're talking to other adults, so whether it's, your kid's teacher or coach or another parent or something, know your audience. And by that I mean, like, kind of consider what is within their control and what is not in their control. Consider how they're likely going to take it. Sometimes I've had conversations with people in schools where, a parent is upset about the way another student is talking to their kid, and the school will share with me, well, there are some circumstances with that other student that we really can't share all of that with that family, but here's what, so sometimes the adult can't necessarily be totally open with you about, well, that kid's got something that contributes to the reason why they're doing this, or the way they're talking, or they're working on that kind of stuff, or whatever. If it's another parent, though, I think sometimes I have learned the hard way, asking myself, well, what is my desired outcome? What do I think, talking to the parent, what do I think that is actually going to lead to? Do I have a request? Is there something that I'm going to actually be able to ask them to do or to not do? Or is it really me just trying to be like, your kid is mean, or your kid is not nice to my kid, if it's really just about kind of communicating, I don't like the way your kid is acting, well, what does that leave the person with? So sometimes I think it's appropriate to talk to another parent, but some parents are going to be much more open to hearing that than others, and you probably want to consider that before you reach out. But if you do reach out, avoid, demonizing a kid, or even really getting into the intentions or the meaning. Try to stick to the facts as you know it, acknowledging that you are coming with one side of the situation. And you might even think about, trying to compliment sandwich if you can. Okay, but getting back to you and your kid, they've come to you and they've talked to you about these situations. Now, the conversation is over, okay? Please do not interrogate them about this situation, from now on. So if they told you that somebody, left them out at recess or whatever, the next day, as soon as they get off the bus, please avoid the temptation of, so what happened at recess? Did they leave you out? Did they play with you? Did they do this? Did they do that? Because what can happen, okay, first of all, you are, making it a big deal, right? And so a lot of this stuff is not a big deal. A lot of the things that they come home and talk to you about are just one little flip comment that happened over the course of a whole day, and it really wasn't anything big, but they happened to tell you about it. Well, now you've latched onto it, and you're talking about it like it's a huge deal, but that can actually lead to a real problem where kids learn, okay, if I want mom's undivided attention, there has to be a problem and I have to be a victim, and people have to be being mean to me. And so there are cases where sometimes kids will just almost they'll exaggerate, or they'll kind of invent stuff because they know that's a really great way to get you one-on-one, all wrapped up in them. Their siblings can fend for themselves while you're in their room hugging and crying and sorting all of this out and calling people and whatever. And that's very rewarding for some kids. So avoid those interrogations, play it cool, You don't have to bring it up all of the time. Maybe casually you bring it up a little bit later. Oh yeah, so what about that thing at recess? Did anything ever come of that? But just sort of play it cool. You don't want it to become the only thing you talk about. Okay, another thing that I think is important is helping kids take feedback, and how do we empower our kids? All right, so this is really hard to talk about with parents, and it's very hard for parents to talk about with their kids. It is kind of like a minefield, because I never want to be blaming a victim, And I know that as parents, we don't want to make our kids feel bad about something that they're coming to us in a vulnerable place, telling us that, their feelings are hurt about something, right? So we don't want to make our kids feel bad about that, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm coming across as blaming a victim. So this is dangerous territory, but it's important. So sometimes kids will be upset about something, and they'll tell you, like, everybody's always telling me to shut up. I say something, and everybody's like, shut up, shut up, shut up. And you're kind of sitting there quietly thinking, like, kind of know where they're coming from, because occasionally I've sort of thought that in my head and wanted to say it out loud, but I didn't, because I'm trying to really not say things like, shut up to you. Even though I would really like just like a small moment of peace every now and then, but you're very chatty. So like occasionally there's a situation where kids' peers are like calling them out on something, you're like, yeah. That's probably something you do, And by the way, that's like, I know that there are things that I do that annoy people. I know that there are things that I do that annoy my family members and the people I come into contact with, because all of us do things that are annoying to other people. Our kids can be annoying, and their peers may call them out on it and may not be very sensitive. And going back to that, like, athletic or attractive or whatever, people who are athletic or attractive or whatever, they have a lot of wiggle room. They've got like a very wide range of things that people will forgive them for. But kids who are maybe not interested in the same kinds of things, or maybe they're, not very athletic, or they're kind of awkward or gawky or whatever, or they don't wear the Air Force Ones, and they don't fit in, they have a narrow range of what other people will tolerate. And that is sad, but true. And I do think it's helpful to understand, like, how do people experience my kid? Are they generally pretty likable? Or are they kind of tough to be around sometimes? And I know that's a sad thing to say and a hard thing to think about, but it's important if you want to help your kid navigate some of these situations and maybe make some changes that are going to help them feel better and experience the world in a better way. Because kind of like we were talking about, people who are likable, other people respond very well to them. And so they kind of go around having these great experiences of people. And the opposite is true as well. So sometimes there are ways that we can kind of break that apart. So we talk about, how do you take an insult, for example, or take a comment, that whole like shut up thing, or sometimes when I hear the same thing from people a lot, even when it's kind of rude and makes me feel bad, I like to try to break it apart and keep only the part that's helpful. So sometimes I talk to kids about things like, the shut up thing. So people are saying shut up a lot. It's like, okay, I know that sometimes people like a break from hearing what I'm saying or other people are saying, right? So I'm gonna take the helpful part of that, and I'm gonna throw away the hurtful part of it, Or at the same time is another really good concept. So sometimes, like, a kid might feel left out. Nobody invites me to do things. Nobody wants to hang out with me. So you might say something like, it sounds like you feel really left out. At the same time, you don't really feel like doing the kinds of things that those kids are doing. Because both can be true. A kid can feel left out and also really not feel like being included in what they're doing. I feel like that a lot, to tell you the truth. Like, sometimes I'm like, I do want to be invited, but I don't want to go. I want to know that people want me there, but I really want to just stay at home. And I think it's okay to help kids understand at the same time, because then you got something to work with. If the scale tips in one direction or the other, where it's like, but I really am actually feeling lonely, it's like, and then maybe you sometimes kind of got to do some of the stuff that they're doing, even if you don't really love doing those things. You kind of figure, well, every now and then I kind of got to put my time in, you know. Getting back to the desired outcome. So without criticizing, judging, or blaming, help them figure out what their outcome is and what their desired outcome is and what gets in the way of reaching it. You know, so I really don't want to talk about those things, or I really don't want to do those things. Figure out if you can identify skills to build or steps that they can take to get that desired outcome. Offer support where you can, make a plan and check in. And when we're talking about support, that's everything we've already gone over. As a parent, if you're having these kinds of conversations with your kids, that is support. But you're also going to be trying to facilitate and foster and create opportunities. So if a kid is having trouble connecting with peers at school in a bigger group, you might do a little more of inviting like a kid over, or helping them sign up for clubs or activities where there might be a smaller group of kids who are involved in or interested in something that they're interested in. Think about how and when and where they're most successful and try to arrange those opportunities for them. So, you know, even things like if you know that you've got a kid who's very, very active and maybe has like a hard time with sort of unstructured play kinds of stuff, you might have the play date be at one of those like Sky Zone type places, or those climbing places, or something where there's like an activity, you know, so it's not so much of the unstructured time, but you're trying to help them be successful. Thinking about how you play with your kid too is important. So if, let's say there's a kid where there's a pattern of like people think they're bossy or something, when you're playing with that kid, or when you're figuring out what to do, does your kid kind of call the shots and say, no, we're going to do it this way, or let's do this, and you're like, okay, fine, whatever, because I don't actually want to do any of this except where I feel like I need to spend time with you, and I do want to spend time with you, so I'll just say okay to whatever it is that you want to do, because really, like, it's the same to me. I don't actually care if I'm the red guy or the blue guy or whatever, but if your kid is always insistent and kind of inflexible and they want to always have things their way, it's actually kind of helpful for you to have some preferences when you're playing with them. You know, well, no, I want a turn going first. Well, you got to go first last time. Now it's my turn to go first. You know, so push back a little bit like other kids might, so that they can get some practice and some opportunities there. All right, so questions. Anything come up? Okay, so let's say a kid is really upset and they don't necessarily lay it all out for you, like something happened at school today and here's what it is, but you just know a kid's upset or they're crying or something. And you might say, what's going on, what happened? And they say nothing, or I don't want to talk, or something like that. I guess I'd first be thinking about what has happened in the past. So if you've had these kind of conversations in the past, is it possible that it's led right into like corrections about what they, well, you know, you are kind of bossy. Look at how you do this, or look at how you do that. You know, does it turn into kind of a critique of how they do stuff? And if that's the case, then they probably, when they're feeling sad and vulnerable like that, they don't necessarily want to hand you like more evidence for how they have messed up in the past, right? So you might have to kind of go through a few times where they're upset and they're not talking to you. And in those cases, I think your goal is not to get the information. It's to help them understand that you love them and you care about them and you're there for them in whatever way they want. You know, so you might say, well, if you've asked them, you know, what's going on, and they're like, nothing, I don't want to talk about it, you might approach and say something like, well, it looks like you've had a bad day, and I am here if you want to talk about it. If you don't feel like you want to talk about it and you want some company, I can be here and not talk. Or if you feel like you want to do something to like distract yourself, like play a game or watch a show or help me make dinner or whatever, you can do that too. So you're offering yourself, but you're not trying to get the information in. And that you'll have to probably do that a few times before you'll start to be able to have those conversations.
This one's good for all ages. How do you stop your kid using the comeback attitude or shrugging or saying whatever on you?
Yeah. Okay, so the comeback attitude or whatever, using whatever on you. Well, first of all, I think, especially when we get more towards the tween and teen years, sometimes kids kind of almost have to kind of give you a little bit of that comeback attitude of whatever. I encourage parents to not worry so much about if your kid's whatever, and then they go and do it. Let them say whatever, as long as the result is they're doing what you told them to do. It gives them a little bit of independence. It gives them a little bit of they feel like they're kind of in charge of themselves and you're not just the boss of them all the time. But as long as they're doing what you told them to do, I would kind of let go of that. I don't know if that responds to it, but.
How do I teach my child to be inclusive and respect his friends' choices at the same time? This is for 7 and 9.
How do you teach your kid to be inclusive and also respect his choices? I think of who he wants to be friends with. So maybe inviting people over to play or something like that. So I would be pretty honest about it. So let's say, there's your kid says they don't like somebody. I don't want to invite him because I don't like him. I don't want to play with him. I guess I would ask a little bit about why. Some kids will say, well, he's annoying, or he never lets us do this, or he always tattles on us, or he always does this, or he always does that. I would not necessarily try to debate those reasons, but I would be honest about whatever it is that is making you feel like you want that kid to be invited over. So it might be, well, the thing is he lives right next door, and I gotta tell you, he's gonna see that you're having a birthday party and he's in your class, and I think he's gonna feel bad, and it's gonna make me feel bad knowing that he and his mom are probably gonna be sitting there feeling bad that he wasn't invited to this. So I think sometimes you just sort of take one for the team because it's the right thing to do, But then I think there are other situations, so if it's a smaller kind of play date situation and a kid doesn't want to invite somebody over because he's always tattling on them or whatever, I would say, okay, I get it. You don't always want to play with him, but I'm friends with his mom, or he lives next door, and so sometimes he's going to come over. So how do we deal with that? So you kind of give the space, but you also help him understand maybe he doesn't ever have anybody to play with, and you got a lot of people to play with. So how about if you sometimes play with them in a way that feels tolerable to you? So not all the time, not every single time you got people over, but in a way that feels okay to you, and that's being kind.
Okay, and the last 2 questions are just more, I think, general questions. How can we attend more of these sessions? So if you fill this out for me, if you, where is it? Here it is. I'm sorry. If you scan this, the feedback form, I set it down. There's a spot on the bottom, and you can give us any feedback. If you have an idea for a program you'd like to see, if there's a topic that is of interest to you,
My recording stopped.
please
Sorry.
let me know.